I found the hotel receipts on a Tuesday. Not because I was snooping, I wasn't that kind of husband. My wife Karen handled most of our finances. She always had, even before we got married. I was the one who built things, fixed things, showed up early and stayed late at the job site. She was the organized one, the smart one. At least, that's what I told myself for 11 years. I only saw the receipt because our joint credit card statement came in the mail that day, and Karen was at her book club, and the envelope was already half open from being stuffed in the mailbox wrong. I pulled it out just to set it on the counter for her. But I'm a contractor. I read documents. It's habit. Hilton Garden Inn. April 14th. $189. Checked in at 2:17 p.m., checked out at 6:44 a.m. the following morning. I stood in my kitchen for a long time. April 14th was a Wednesday. Karen had told me she was visiting her sister Linda in Columbus that weekend. I remembered because I'd offered to drive her and she'd said no, it was fine. Linda was going through some stuff and she wanted it to be just the two of them. I'd made chili that night and watched the game alone and didn't think twice about it. I set the statement back on the counter. Then I picked it up again. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at it for probably 20 minutes. The hotel was 40 minutes from our house. Not Columbus, not anywhere near Columbus. I didn't say anything when Karen got home that night. She came in around 10, smelled like wine, kissed me on the cheek, asked if I'd eaten. I said yes. She went upstairs to shower. I sat on the couch watching a show I wasn't watching. That was the beginning of the 2 weeks I spent becoming a completely different person. I want to be clear about something. I'm not a dramatic man. I'm 51 years old. I grew up in rural Ohio. My father was a man who said what he meant and meant what he said, and I've tried to live the same way. I don't do games. I don't do mind tricks. When something's broken, you look at it, figure out what's wrong, fix it or replace it. That's how I've always operated. But something happened to me in those 2 weeks that I still don't fully understand. I went quiet in a way I'd never been quiet before. Not angry quiet, just still, like I'd stepped outside my own life and was watching it from a distance. And the man I was watching was moving through his days normally, laughing at the right times, passing the salt at dinner, asking how her day was, while the real me was somewhere else entirely, taking inventory. The second charge showed up when I looked back through the previous 2 months of statements. March 3rd. Same hotel. $204. That was the night Karen had gone to a work event for the insurance company where she was an account manager. Networking dinner, she'd called it. Back late. I went further back. I found one more. February 19th. $176. Different hotel. Same city. That one I couldn't immediately match to an alibi she'd given me, which almost made it worse. It meant there were probably times she'd gone and I hadn't even noticed she was gone. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't hire anyone. I didn't need to. What I did was call my buddy Frank, who does IT for a law firm downtown. Frank and I have been friends since high school. I told him what I found. He didn't say much for a moment, and then he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said I didn't know yet, but I needed to know who. He said, "Give him a couple days." I also called my brother-in-law, Ray, Karen's younger brother. This might surprise you, but Ray and I are genuinely close. Closer than most brothers-in-law, and more importantly, Ray is someone who has never once in his life been able to lie to my face. I've known this about him since our first Thanksgiving together, 2013. I called him on my lunch break and I told him what I'd found and I asked him directly if he knew anything. Ray went very quiet. That quiet told me everything. He said, "Dave, I didn't think it was still going on." I swear to God I thought it ended. Still going on. Which meant it had been going on long enough for people to know about it. Long enough for it to have a beginning, a middle, and apparently a period where someone thought it was over. I asked him who. He said a man named Scott Dempsey, Karen's colleague. He'd been at the company about 18 months. Ray had met him at the company holiday party last December, seen the way Karen talked to him, noticed something, confronted her privately in January. She'd cried and told him it was over. It had been a mistake. She was ending it. I thanked Ray. I told him I wasn't angry at him. I meant it. Then I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a Wendy's for 45 minutes. Here's what I kept coming back to. She had looked me in the eye every single day since February, probably longer, and felt nothing about it. No guilt that I could see, no distance. She still laughed at my jokes. She still reached for my hand in movie theaters. She still complained about my muddy boots by the back door, and I still left them there, and she still moved them, and that was our thing. That was the small, ordinary language of our marriage. And the whole time she was doing this. I drove home, I made dinner. I asked her how her day was. That night I lay awake next to her and thought very carefully about what I actually wanted. I did not want to confront her and watch her cry and listen to her reasons and go to couples therapy and try to rebuild something on a foundation that had been rotting quietly for God knows how long. I'd seen other men do that. A few had come out the other side okay. Most hadn't. Not really. They'd white-knuckled their way through the counseling sessions and the difficult conversations and the tentative rebuilding, and 5 years later they were either divorced anyway or they were still married, but hollowed out, always flinching slightly, always waiting. I was 51 years old. I had maybe 30 good years left if I was lucky and took care of myself. I was not going to spend them flinching. What I wanted was to leave, but I wanted to leave correctly, with my finances protected, my dignity intact, and the truth on record so that no one, not her family, not our friends, not our 2 grown kids, could ever look at me and wonder if I'd just given up or lost my nerve. So I called an attorney. Her name is Patricia Howell, and she's been handling divorces in our county for 23 years. Frank had recommended her. I sat in her office on a Thursday afternoon and I told her everything I knew and showed her the credit card statements. She was calm and thorough, and she explained exactly where my options were in Ohio, what I was entitled to, what the process looked like. She told me to stop using the joint accounts immediately and open a personal account, which I did that same afternoon. She told me to document everything going forward. I did not tell Karen I'd seen a lawyer. During this time, I started paying closer attention to Karen's schedule, not obsessively. I wasn't following her or tracking her phone. I just started noticing the patterns I'd been ignoring. The Tuesday and Thursday evenings she stayed late at the office. The occasional Saturday morning yoga class that lasted 3 hours. The way she always left the room to take certain calls. The second week, I started quietly moving things. Not furniture, not anything obvious, just my important documents. Our marriage certificate, my tax records, the deed to my truck, the paperwork on the savings account I'd had since before we were married. I moved them to a locked box I kept in my work van. I also took stock of what was in the house that was mine before the marriage, things I'd brought in, things I'd built. I am a man who has spent 30 years building things. I know how to take apart a structure without it collapsing on you. On the 14th day, I was ready. Karen told me at breakfast that she was going to stay late at work that night. End of quarter, big push. She might not be home until 9 or 10. She said it the same way she always said it. Casual. Practiced. Looking at her phone while she talked. I said, "No problem. I'll grab something at the site." She smiled and kissed me on the cheek. I went to work. I came home at 2 in the afternoon when I knew she'd be at the office. I packed 2 bags. Clothes, my tools, my grandfather's watch, the photograph of my dad and me at the lake when I was 9, the small things that were mine and only mine. I put them in my truck. I cleaned the kitchen, which is a strange thing to do in that moment, but it felt important, like closing something properly. I left the house looking exactly as it always looked. Then I texted Ray. I told him what day it was. He already knew what I meant. At 4:30, I drove to the Hilton Garden Inn. I want to say this part carefully. I am not telling you I did anything illegal. I am not describing violence of any kind. I'm describing a man who had done his homework. I knew the hotel. I knew how the parking lot was laid out. I'd driven past it 4 times in the previous 2 weeks, at different hours, learning its rhythms the way I learn any job site before I start work. I knew which exit was less visible from the lobby. I'd also, through a combination of Frank's skills and my own attention, learned that Scott Dempsey drove a silver Toyota 4Runner 2019, and I'd found it in the lot on 2 of those 4 drives, always in the same corner near the back entrance. It was there when I arrived at 4:30. I parked where I could see it. At 5:12, Karen's Subaru pulled in. I watched her walk toward the back entrance. She was wearing the blue top I'd complimented her on last spring. She was looking at her phone. She disappeared inside. I sat in my truck for 11 minutes. Then I walked in the front entrance, went to the front desk, and told the young woman behind the counter that I was meeting my wife and she had my key card. I gave Karen's name. I said we were celebrating our anniversary. True, in a sense, we'd just passed it. And I'd meant to surprise her, but my card wasn't working. I smiled. I am, evidently, a convincing man when I need to be. She gave me a key card to room 214. I stood in the hallway outside room 214 for a moment. I could hear the television inside. I could hear voices, too low to make out words. I knocked twice and opened the door with the card before anyone could answer. I will not describe in detail what I walked in on, because it's not the part of the story that matters. What matters is this. Karen looked at me and went completely white. The kind of white that isn't just shock. It was the color of someone watching their life rearrange itself in real time, watching the careful structure they'd built collapse from a single load-bearing point giving way. I looked at her for a moment. Then I looked at Scott Dempsey, whom I had never met. And I said in a completely level voice, "I've already talked to a lawyer. We're done. This is the last time you'll see me upset about this." Then I looked back at Karen. I said, "The house is yours until the papers are signed. I'll be in touch through Patricia Howell." I had printed Patricia's business card. I set it on the dresser by the door. Then I left. I walked down the hallway, down the stairs, out the front entrance, across the parking lot to my truck. My hands were steady. I started the engine and pulled out onto the road and drove to Frank's house, where I had already arranged to stay for a few nights. Frank had a beer waiting on the counter. I sat down at his kitchen table and I said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. He didn't ask me anything. He just sat across from me and we drank our beers and watched the last 2 innings of a game, and that was it for the night. Karen called 11 times between 5:40 and 10 p.m. I didn't answer. She texted, "Please answer. We need to talk. I know what you must be thinking. Please just call me." Then, "Where are you? Are you okay?" Then, "Dave, please. I'm sorry. Please." And then she stopped. She called Ray, who told her gently that he'd known for a few days and that she should probably talk to a lawyer of her own. He told me later that she cried for a long time on the phone. He said he felt terrible. I told him that wasn't his to carry. She called my brother Thomas. Thomas called me. I picked up that call. Thomas and I talked for about 40 minutes. I told him everything, calmly, with the credit card statements as my supporting documentation. I was not dramatic. I was not angry on the phone. I just told him the facts and told him what I decided. Thomas is 6 years older than me, and he has never been a man to waste words. At the end, he said, "You did this right." I don't know why that mattered to me, but it did. The next morning, I called both of my kids. My son Marcus is 24 and lives in Denver. My daughter Ellen is 22 and just finished her master's degree in Nashville. These were the 2 hardest calls of my life. Harder than the hotel. Harder than sitting with those credit card statements at the kitchen table. I told them both separately, and I told them both the same thing. This was between their mother and me. I loved them without condition. I was not asking them to choose sides or think less of their mother, and I was going to be fine. Marcus didn't say much. I could hear him processing it. Ellen cried and I let her. And when she was done, she said, "Dad, are you actually okay?" And I said, "I'm going to be." That was the most honest thing I could offer. I did not contact Karen again for 3 days. When I did, it was through Patricia's office, with a drafted letter that Patricia had reviewed, notifying Karen officially of my intent to file. In Ohio, the process takes time, and there are steps, and I followed every one of them. I had documentation. I had a lawyer who knew what she was doing. I was not in a hurry. What I discovered during those first weeks at Frank's house, sleeping on a very firm futon and eating a lot of takeout, was that I was less devastated than I'd expected to be. I don't say that to sound cold. I mourned things. I mourned the version of my life I'd thought I had. I mourned Tuesday nights watching TV with someone who knew where the remote was. I mourned the specific, stupid comfort of familiar. That's real. I don't want to minimize it. But underneath all of that, I found something else. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. It took me about a week to identify what it was. It was relief. Not relief that the marriage was over exactly. More like the relief of a man who has been told he has a serious illness and has just finished the most difficult treatment and the worst is behind him now. And whatever comes next, at least it's honest. At least it's real. At least he knows exactly where he stands. I had been building my life on ground that was softer than I knew, and now I wasn't. The divorce took 8 months. Karen initially pushed back on some of the asset division, which I expected. Patricia handled it. I got my fair share of what we built together, which was considerable. We'd owned the house for 9 years, I'd put significant equity into it with my own labor, and the value had gone up substantially. I wasn't greedy, but I wasn't going to walk away from what I'd earned either. Karen and Scott Dempsey did not last, for what it's worth. Ray told me 6 months after everything started that Scott had ended things around the time the divorce proceedings got complicated. Apparently the reality of a situation and the fantasy of it are different things. I didn't feel triumphant about that. I didn't feel much about it at all. What I felt was busy. I threw myself into work in a way I hadn't in years. I took on 2 big projects back to back. I bought a small house. Nothing like the family home, just a 2-bedroom near a decent fishing lake that I've always liked. And I spent evenings and weekends putting it in order, fixing the things that needed fixing, making it mine. There is something very clarifying about physical work when your life is complicated. The problem in front of you is real. The solution is visible. You either level it correctly or you don't. Marcus flew out to visit me 3 months after everything went down. We didn't talk about his mother much. We went fishing 2 days in a row and I taught him how to do a repair on the deck I was building, and we had a good time. When he left, he hugged me at the airport longer than he had since he was a teenager. That meant something. Ellen and I text almost every day now, which is more than we did before. She calls on Sundays. She told me recently that she'd talked to her mother, that Karen seemed to be doing okay, finding her footing. I said I was glad to hear it. I meant that. I don't wish Karen harm. I don't think about Karen that much, honestly, which is strange after 11 years of marriage, but there it is. I think about my fishing lake. I think about the deck I still need to finish on the east side of the new house. I think about whether Marcus might want to come out again in the fall when the weather cools down. I am 51 years old, and I have a very quiet house, and I have learned how to make a decent pasta from scratch because I got tired of takeout. And most mornings when I make coffee and sit by the window that looks out over the backyard, I feel something I didn't feel for a long time in my own home. I feel like myself, not the edited version. Not the husband who didn't ask questions because asking questions would have changed something he wasn't ready to change. Not the man who set the credit card statement on the counter and almost walked away without reading it. Just me. 51. 2 kids who call. A friend who had a beer waiting. A truck I own outright. A house that's coming along. That's enough. That's more than enough. The last thing I want to say is this. For whoever needs to hear it, I'm not telling you that the way I handled it is the only way or even the right way. Every situation is different. Every marriage is different. I'm not holding myself up as some example of how it should be done, but I will say this much. There is a version of that day where I don't read the credit card statement, where I put it on the counter and go about my evening and Karen comes home and we watch TV and life continues exactly as it was, soft ground and all. That version of me is still in that house, still making chili on Wednesday nights alone, still not asking the questions he should ask. I'm grateful every day I'm not him. I've had a lot of time to think about how things unfolded. Not obsessively, I'm past that, but in the quiet way you turn something over when you're not in a hurry anymore and you just want to understand it clearly. What I keep coming back to is this. The way something ends is almost always determined by the way it was being lived long before the ending arrived. Karen didn't make one bad decision on one bad night. She made 100 small decisions over months, maybe longer, each one a little easier than the last because the one before it had gone unpunished. That's how it works. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a slow drift, 1 degree at a time until you look up and you're somewhere completely different from where you started. And I made my own decisions too. I chose not to ask certain questions. I chose comfort over clarity. That's on me. I'm not carrying it as shame. I'm carrying it as information. There's a difference. What I learned from all of it is that intelligence isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being willing to see what's actually in front of you, even when seeing it is going to cost you something. For 2 months, those credit card statements sat in my mailbox and I never looked at them. Not because I couldn't read, because some part of me had already made a deal with myself to not look too hard. That's not ignorance. That's a choice dressed up as ignorance. And it kept me in a smaller life than I deserved. The 2 weeks between finding that first receipt and walking into that hotel room were the most deliberate 2 weeks of my life. I didn't act on emotion. I didn't blow up my finances or my relationships or my dignity trying to punish someone in a moment. I thought. I planned. I called Patricia before I said a single word to Karen. That discipline. That ability to slow down when everything in you wants to burn something, that's the only reason I came out of it with anything intact. Integrity isn't something you perform for other people. It's the thing you find out you either have or you don't when nobody's watching and the situation is genuinely hard. Ray knew about the affair and said nothing to me for months. I don't blame him, but I'll tell you what I noticed. The moment I found out and called him directly, he told me the truth immediately. He didn't have to. He chose to. That's character. Frank had a beer waiting on the counter without me asking. That's character. The people who showed up when it counted. I've held on to those people. The rest I've let be where they are. The hardest part wasn't the hotel. It wasn't signing the papers or dividing the accounts or sleeping on Frank's futon for 2 weeks like a man half my age. The hardest part was accepting that a long chapter of my life had simply been wrong in ways I hadn't seen, and that was survivable. More than survivable. It was, in the end, the thing that finally pushed me back to myself. I am not the same man who left that house with 2 bags and a truck. I'm quieter, more deliberate, less willing to accept soft ground just because it's familiar. And most mornings, when I sit by that window with my coffee and look out at the yard I'm still putting in order, that feels less like loss and more like the most honest thing I've ever built.